I sold my business and my wife left me, and 1 month later, she took everything I worked for. Hey Reddit, I'm writing this because I honestly don't know what else to do. I thought I had everything figured out. I spent almost half my life building a business from scratch, pouring in all my energy, time, and basically my entire soul. I finally sold it for a significant sum, expecting it to be the beginning of a comfortable life for me and my wife. She'd been by my side since we were in our early 20s, and this was supposed to be our moment of peace. The next chapter, freedom and security, at long last. Let me backtrack a bit. Building this business was no walk in the park. I started it small, basically out of my garage, with barely enough capital to cover my initial expenses. For years, I worked long hours, missed countless weekends, and had my fair share of sleepless nights. I faced all the typical challenges of a small business owner: finances, tough competition, and moments when I thought I'd have to give up. My wife and I met just before I started the business. She knew the dream I had, and she always supported me, reminding me that all the sacrifices would pay off one day. During those rough years, I often felt guilty. I'd see my friends taking vacations, spending time with family, while I was barely keeping my head above water. But every time I thought about quitting, my wife was there, reassuring me that it would all be worth it. We used to stay up late talking about the future, imagining a life where we wouldn't have to worry about money. We'd make plans, places we'd go, things we'd do, all the dreams we'd chase once we'd made it. Those conversations kept me going when everything else felt like it was falling apart. And finally, it did pay off. After years of grinding and building, my business became successful. Things were stable, and I started feeling like the vision we'd been chasing was within reach. That's when I started to think seriously about selling. My wife and I would talk about it, weighing the pros and cons, and she'd always say, "This is what we've been waiting for." Eventually, I found a buyer, and after a lot of back and forth, I signed the deal. Just like that, the dream we'd been working toward was real. The day the sale was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My wife and I celebrated. We had a nice dinner, talked about what this meant for us, and even took a short vacation to unwind. I remember sitting on the beach with her, both of us smiling and talking about the future, traveling, maybe even starting a family, or dedicating our time to new projects. We laughed about how hard those early years had been, how we'd sacrificed so much to get here. I felt like I was finally free, ready to start living the life we'd dreamed of. Then, barely a month later, she handed me divorce papers. At first I thought it was some kind of joke or a misunderstanding, but when I looked at her, she was completely serious. She told me that she needed space and that we'd grown apart. I was in shock. I didn't know how to process what she was saying. After 15 years together, after everything we'd been through, after finally reaching the life we'd been dreaming about, she wanted to leave? I tried to talk to her, to understand. I asked her if she'd been unhappy, if there was something I'd missed, but she just kept saying that she needed to find herself and that we'd grown apart. The timing felt too perfect, too calculated. We'd been together through the worst of times, through struggles, debt, and uncertainty. Now that things were good, now that we were finally free to enjoy life, she was leaving. I felt blindsided, betrayed. It was as if all those years, all those late-night conversations, had meant nothing to her. The worst part? Once the divorce proceedings started, I realized just how much I was about to lose. Despite the fact that I was the one who'd poured my life into building the business, she demanded half of everything from the sale. I couldn't believe it. We'd always talked about our life together, what we'd do with this money, but here she was, taking what I'd worked for, what I'd sacrificed so much for, as if she'd planned this all along. My lawyer tried to fight for me, but with the assets combined and our long marriage, the court awarded her a significant portion. She walked away with more than half of what I'd made from the sale. Just like that, years of my life, years of sacrifice and hard work, were taken from me. The dream I thought we'd share was gone, and all I had left was a fraction of what I'd earned. Now, I'm alone, staring at an empty house and wondering how everything went so wrong. The person I thought would be with me forever, the person who was supposed to be my partner, took everything and left without a second thought. I can't help but think back to all those moments when I'd stayed up working late, missing out on life, believing I was building a future for us. And now I have nothing to show for it. I feel used, betrayed, like the person I loved, the person I trusted with everything, was only waiting for the right moment to leave. All those memories we made, all the struggles we went through, they feel tainted now. I can't shake the feeling that she was waiting for me to succeed, waiting for me to finally make it, so she could walk away with as much as possible. In the early days after my ex-wife left, life was a complete blur. Every morning, I woke up to that gut-wrenching realization that everything I had worked for was gone. She didn't just take money or assets. She took my sense of security, my confidence, and the future I thought I'd built. I was left with nothing but an empty house and a depleted bank account, questioning every choice I'd made. Initially, I was paralyzed. Friends and family tried to reach out, but it was like I was in a fog, unable to hear them. I spent days in that empty house, thinking about all the sacrifices I had made. I thought about the sleepless nights, the skipped vacations, the endless grind, all of it done with her encouragement and support, or so I thought. Now, the thought of starting over felt impossible. I had poured everything into that business, that life, and now it was all in shambles. But eventually, I couldn't ignore the reality in front of me. I didn't have the luxury of wallowing. Bills still needed to be paid, and I had to find a way to survive. I started by taking small consulting jobs, working with companies that could benefit from my experience. I won't lie, at first it was grueling. Every project reminded me of what I'd lost, of the fact that I was essentially back to square one. But over time, I found solace in the work. There was something liberating about building something entirely for myself, with no one else involved. My small consulting gigs slowly began to pay off. Bit by bit, I rebuilt my savings, and with it, my confidence. Eventually, those gigs evolved into a new business venture. This time, it was different. I was cautious, focused, and I didn't let myself get lost in the relentless ambition that had defined my previous career. I knew now the importance of balance, of keeping something for myself, something she hadn't taken. My work became my therapy, a way to channel the betrayal and bitterness into something productive. Fast forward 7 years, and I'm a different man. The business I started after the divorce isn't as big as my first, but it's successful, profitable, and most importantly, it's mine. I've built friendships, rediscovered hobbies I'd neglected for years, and even began dating again. But I've been careful this time. I no longer give my trust freely. The betrayal left scars, and while I've healed, I'm more guarded than before. Then, last month, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. I was greeted by a familiar voice, a voice I hadn't heard in years, my ex-wife. She sounded different, hesitant, almost nervous. She told me she'd been thinking about me, about us, and wanted to catch up. I couldn't believe her audacity. After all these years, she thought she could just reach out, as if nothing had happened. I asked her bluntly what she wanted. She hesitated, and then said she wanted to apologize, to talk about how things ended. Her tone was subdued, almost regretful. She mentioned that things hadn't worked out the way she'd planned and that she missed the life we once had. It was surreal hearing her say that. This was the same woman who'd left me without a second thought, who had walked away with half of everything I'd worked for. I agreed to meet her, but not because I had any sympathy for her. I wanted to see this through on my own terms, to finally close the door on that chapter of my life. Part of me wanted to show her the man I'd become, to let her see that I'd rebuilt everything she thought she'd destroyed. I chose a small cafe far from the places we used to go, and made sure it was a setting where I'd feel in control. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The confident, assured woman I'd once known was gone. She looked worn, almost defeated. She tried to start with small talk, reminiscing about the good times. But I cut her off. I wasn't there for nostalgia. She sighed, looked down at her coffee, and then told me the truth. She was struggling. Apparently, life after the divorce hadn't gone as planned. She dated other men, chased after dreams of freedom, but nothing had worked out. She was running out of money, barely getting by, and had realized she'd made a mistake. She told me she'd been thinking about our life together, how I'd always supported her, how I'd sacrificed so much for us. She even hinted that she wanted to start over. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything she'd put me through, she wanted to start over. She tried to make herself look like the victim, talking about how hard life had been. But I wasn't swayed. I wasn't the same broken man she'd left behind, and I made that very clear. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that the man she left no longer existed. I'd rebuilt my life from scratch, and I had no interest in letting her back in. I reminded her that she was the one who walked away, who took everything she could and left me with nothing. I told her that I'd found peace and purpose on my own, and that I didn't owe her anything. Her expression was priceless. She looked genuinely shocked, as if she hadn't expected me to stand my ground. She stammered, trying to find the right words, but I cut her off. I told her that I wished her well, but that she was a part of my past, not my future. As I walked out of that cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt truly free, as though I'd finally closed a door that had been lingering open. But the story doesn't end there. A week later, she reached out again, this time more desperate than before. She told me she had nowhere else to turn, that she needed financial help to get back on her feet. The irony was too much. I'd spent years picking up the pieces after she'd left, and now she was asking for my support. So Reddit, how do I go about this? Because this is draining. Update 1. After her plea for financial help, I sat there, phone in hand, just staring at her message. The irony was bitter and, admittedly, satisfying. The woman who'd once drained my accounts and walked out with more than half of everything I'd built was now scrambling back, asking me for help. It was like something out of a twisted sitcom. I could practically hear the audience laughing at her audacity, at the nerve of her to come crawling back after all these years. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, the sleepless nights, and the endless grind. I remembered the way she'd left me shattered and empty, with barely a penny to my name. And now, when life had humbled her, she had the gall to reach out, expecting me to swoop in like some white knight and save her. Not a chance. My friends who knew the story were adamant. I owed her nothing. Some even suggested blocking her, letting her fall flat on her face without any response. But I knew I couldn't just let this go without addressing it head on. I wanted her to know just how much she had underestimated me, just how wrong she had been in thinking she could toy with my life and walk away unscathed. So I crafted a response, measured and calm. I told her I wasn't interested in helping her, that she had made her bed, and it was time she lay in it. I reminded her that she had once walked away without looking back, with nothing but greed in her eyes. And now, as far as I was concerned, she was just another chapter in my past, a lesson learned, nothing more. The silence that followed was deafening. Days went by without any response from her. I half expected her to fire back with anger, to lash out or try to guilt-trip me. But instead, there was nothing. And honestly, it felt like victory. I could tell she was processing the rejection, maybe realizing for the first time that she couldn't manipulate her way out of this one. She'd burned the bridge, and I wasn't about to rebuild it for her. A week later, she tried calling me. I let it ring, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. She left a voicemail, her tone drenched in desperation. She talked about how she was struggling, about how she'd made mistakes, and how she now understood the true value of what we had. She said she missed the life we shared, and that she was willing to start fresh if I'd let her back in. I deleted the message without a second thought. Another week passed, and I started hearing from mutual acquaintances, friends who had stayed in touch with both of us after the divorce. Some of them reached out, asking if it was true that I was refusing to help her in her time of need. Apparently, she'd been going around telling people that I was leaving her to suffer and refusing to give her a second chance. She painted herself as the victim, the poor woman who'd made a mistake and now just wanted to make things right. One friend in particular, who had always been sympathetic to her side, messaged me with a long rant, accusing me of being heartless and unforgiving. She said that everyone deserves a second chance, and that I was being cruel by holding a grudge after so many years. I could barely contain my disbelief. This woman, who had robbed me of my hard-earned money, my peace, and my future, was now playing the victim to anyone who would listen. I replied to my friend with a short, blunt message. I explained that my ex-wife's choices had left me in ruins, that I had worked tirelessly to rebuild my life, and that her sudden return wasn't about love or second chances. It was about her desperation. I told my friend that if she wanted to help my ex, she was welcome to, but I wasn't going to play the fool twice. I wasn't going to be manipulated again. The backlash was unexpected. A few mutual friends unfollowed me on social media, and one even blocked me. It was shocking, to say the least. People I'd known for years were turning their backs on me, siding with her sob story as though I were the villain in all of this. But instead of anger, I felt something else: clarity. I realized that anyone willing to believe her lies, anyone willing to side with her without understanding the full story, wasn't someone I needed in my life. As the weeks passed, I began to hear less and less from her. The messages stopped, the voicemails ceased, and the mutual friends who'd tried to intervene faded into the background. I could tell she had finally realized that I wasn't going to give in, that I wasn't going to be her safety net. And with every passing day, I felt stronger, more assured that I'd made the right choice. Life continued, and I poured myself back into my work, my hobbies, and the friends who had stood by me from the start. My ex-wife's reappearance had been a harsh reminder of the past, but it had also shown me just how far I'd come. I had built a new life, a life she had no place in, and I wasn't about to let her derail it. But just when I thought the saga was over, she made one last desperate attempt, a move so audacious that it caught me off guard. And this time, I decided to put an end to her games once and for all. Update 3. Just when I thought she'd finally gotten the message, she showed up at my door. It was late evening and I was winding down after a long day, looking forward to a peaceful night. The knock was loud, persistent, and jarring. When I opened the door, there she was, standing in the dim porch light, looking far from the confident woman I'd known. Her face was drawn, her clothes disheveled, and her expression was a mix of desperation and forced determination. Before I could say a word, she started talking, launching into a monologue that was both self-pitying and manipulative. She talked about how hard life had been since the divorce, how she'd tried to move on but realized that I was the one that got away. She claimed she had made a terrible mistake and that she missed me, that she missed us. She begged me to let her back into my life, saying she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. I stood there, arms crossed, listening, but feeling nothing but a growing sense of anger and disappointment. Her words felt hollow, like lines rehearsed from some bad movie. There was no real remorse, no accountability for the hurt she had caused, only a thinly veiled attempt to claw her way back into the life I had rebuilt. When she finally paused, probably expecting me to say something comforting or sympathetic, I shook my head. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice steady but cold. "The life I have now, the one you're so eager to rejoin, you're not part of it. You gave up that chance the day you walked out on me, and there's no coming back from that." She tried to interrupt, her voice rising in desperation, but I held up a hand, stopping her. "This isn't about us growing apart or some tragic love story. You left because you wanted more, because you thought you'd be happier without me. And that's fine. That was your choice. But you don't get to waltz back in whenever it suits you." Her face crumpled, the mask slipping as she realized that her performance wasn't working. She went from pleading to defensive, her tone turning bitter. "After everything I did for you, all the years I supported you," she started, but I cut her off. "Supported me?" I scoffed. "You mean the years you waited around for the payout? Because that's what it was for you, wasn't it? An investment. You were there when it was tough, sure, but the minute there was something to gain, you cashed out and left. Don't pretend this was about support or love." She looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. I was unhappy. I felt trapped. I nodded, letting the silence hang heavy between us. "And you thought you'd find happiness without me. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I've moved on, and I'm not interested in reopening this chapter. Not for you, not for anyone." She stood there, defeated, finally understanding that her manipulation wouldn't work this time. After a few moments, she muttered something under her breath and walked away, her footsteps fading into the night. As I closed the door, I felt a wave of relief, a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. For so long, her betrayal had been a wound I carried, a reminder of the life I'd lost. But now, standing in the quiet of my own home, I realized that I was finally free. From her, from the past, from everything she represented. The next morning, I blocked her number, deleted her messages, and let go of the last remnants of her in my life. And I could care less. I am done with this woman. Hopefully this will be my last update on this part of my life.